To further unpack this, let's now bring in Mr. Toby Shapshak, who's the editor-in-chief of Staff. Toby, it's great to have you with us today. Happy Africa Day. So let's start right at the beginning, right? For better context, when broad-based black economic empowerment, known as BEE nowadays, was initially implemented, it was actually to basically try and bridge the huge economic gap that was existential between black as well as white-owned businesses in the country post-apartheid. But has it really assisted in developing and shaping the intended targets in overcoming some of these bottlenecks as well as historic exclusion of black businesses?
I'm not entirely sure I'm the best commentator on the progress of BEE and whether it's worked or whether it hasn't. But one of the issues of here is not so much whether BEE or which part of the BEE regulation to apply. And for the longest time, the rules and laws governing ICASA and governing broadcast have required that ownership be 30% by historically disadvantaged people. Mm-hmm. In the broader tech industry, it's not that strict. In the broader tech industry, you can get an equivalency investment situation where instead of giving up shareholding in your business, you commit an international business commits to spend money on infrastructure, on training, on supporting that industry. It's the kind of agreement that Microsoft and Google and Ford and Toyota and BMW all use, and that is what is the kind of arrangement that the bigger tech industry. So there's a triple BEE ICT sector code that was established and negotiated a while ago. And what Solly Malatsi has done as the communication minister is give a policy direction as the political oversight to a company or to a regulator, and say to the regulator that they can give credence to this greater understanding of BEE in terms of the ICT sector code and use that instead of having to apply the strict 30% shareholding requirements. And I think that's probably a good thing. It's something that we definitely need in South Africa. We definitely need better connectivity. We definitely need more people getting online. And what we know is that it's very hard to connect people in rural areas, even with cellular. The cell phone towers are expensive. It takes electricity to generate them. We have electricity issues. If you don't have a steady, reliable connection, you don't get much of a signal. It's very expensive. If there's no power, you have to run generators, also expensive. But along comes a solution like a Starlink, which it doesn't matter what cell phone towers and other terrestrial equipment you've got, as long as you've got electricity and you get one of their panels, their base stations, as they call them, ground stations that point up, and you can get the signal. With one of those, you can get signal just about anywhere. And I think that's a massive advantage for South Africa. I have a friend who's a farmer in Pietermaritzburg, and he's been asking me for years, when can I get Starlink? When can I get Starlink? Why? Because, even though they live in Pietermaritzburg, they live outside of town. The cell phone signal's not great. It's too far to run fiber, et cetera, et cetera. All of a sudden, you don't need proximity to infrastructure. It doesn't matter where you are, as long as you can see the sky, and off you go. You can have internet connectivity. So I think on the whole, the connectivity is a good idea. I think the common sense approach to not being strict on the ownership requirement, whereas expanding it into a broader, equivalency investment, as I think it's called, equity equivalence, that's what's going to be done. And that's what a lot of the big tech firms already do. So I just think it just makes sense to rationalize it because
Toby, sorry, just in the interest of time, we're talking about precedents here as well. And speaking of other tech companies, currently in the country, the ICT sector is busy increasing its investments, of course, alongside 600 American companies here in South Africa. Example, Microsoft, IBM as well as Amazon, if I can just throw them in there, and they have never had exclusive individual demands as in this case. Is it even constitutional that a specific company will then demand a separate deal that is right outside of a country's legislation?
Again, I'm not the person to comment on those kind of legal constitutional issues. What has happened is that an international firm has said it's unreasonable to ask us to give up 30% of our subsidiary.
But those are our own policies, Toby.
Please don't argue with me. I'm not trying to defend them. You've asked me to explain it. I'm explaining
no,
what they're saying.
No, I'm not arguing. I'm just putting it out there that the other companies that are operating in the sector are compliant. They've never had issues. I've just given you examples of those companies in the similar sectors as well.
Look, again, I'm not an apologist for any of these big tech firms, and I certainly can't defend what's happened in the past with other investments. You asked me on your show to discuss what this policy direction means and how it'll change. I can just say that a big international firm is not going to give up a shareholding in a subsidiary. They just don't operate like that. They're listed firms. They have international requirements, and as far as I understand, that when tech firms have come in the past, they've had this equity equivalence that they can invest that way. Microsoft wasn't asked to give up 30% of its South African subsidiary, nor was Google or Toyota or BMW, whereas this is the broader way of approaching it, and it's just been that this industry that's governed by CASA, both telecoms and broadcast, have these very strict ownership requirements. This is legislation that's 25 years out of date. No big companies, the people just don't come and invest like they did when Vodacom was being launched, or MTN, where you have to put down several billion rands worth of hardware infrastructure before your company can even operate. In the case of an internet service provider, they just have to tap into the network. No one asked Netflix to build infrastructure there so that people could assume it. But, conversely, MultiChoice has these very strict requirements that it's competing against global companies that aren't required to do the kinds of things MultiChoice is. So there are two sides of the argument. I'm not gonna take either side, but I do think common sense has come through, and these kinds of ownership requirements are they're 25 years out of date, and no one's going to build. SpaceX is not going to build anything in South Africa, requiring them to or any satellite service provider, if it's Amazon's Kuiper, there's no reason for them to build infrastructure when all of the infrastructure is, literally up in space.
We're going to leave it there. Toby, thank you so much for your input this afternoon. That is Mr. Toby Shapshak. There is the editor-in-chief at Staff, weighing in on the proposed policy directive on ICTs.